In this video I want to run through some of the options that we utilise to mount GoPro cameras on a sports bike like this BMW S1000RR. Now you might find that some of these are useful for the kind of riding you might do on the road, but we've found them probably more useful for what we do on a track. And if you've got sufficient cameras and sufficient mounting options at one particular time, you can make a pretty cool video with cutouts and flipping backwards and forwards between different shots from a bike in one lap. So have a look, see what you think. Yeah, one of the most common mounts is here on the front of the bike, where you'll attach a camera to some sort of mount attached to the fairing. Pretty useful if you want to take footage of the track and following other bikes, that type of thing, and not have your bike in the view. Now you can use any width settings here. You can use super view, wide view, narrow view, and they all seem to work pretty well. The one that we use for forward view more frequently than the others is this mount up here on the top of the steering head, and it kind of gets a view through the fairing. And even though the screen here is in the dark tinted version that you see, or you can buy as an option, it still actually views pretty good out in the broad, in complete sunlight. Now we use the RAM mount, so you'll see the RAM mount system makes it real easy to attach, detach, and move the camera around and put it in different positions. But what I found is it seems to work better when we've got it further back from the screen. We're not getting too much focus on the screen here, but it fits in the dash and the tachometer, and you can see the speedo and that type of thing. So a pretty interesting view, and like I said, probably the most common one that we utilize. You'll see up front that we've got remotes mounted, and that is to cover the a range of cameras we've got. We don't want all 6 cameras to run all the time, so we have 3 of the cameras attached to the left-hand remote and 3 of the cameras attached to the right-hand remote. Another alternative we've got here is to have this forward-mounted camera actually move back slightly and attach to a little RAM mount on closer to the fuel tank. Now, it's not a bad one to get a broader view of the motorbike and much more of the track in the screen. Now, we simply use the A-Sider pillion mount attachment here. So this little RAM mount or little ball mount, you'll see, simply attaches to the front of the A-Sider pillion grip. And yeah, not a bad alternative. Still looking at the forward mounting or forward view, here's another alternative using the frame slider on the right hand side of the bike in this particular case. And it's not a bad option for getting much closer to the road and a view of the front wheel moving up and down and that type of thing. Now, just a couple of things to be cautious of, and that is if you turn this around and mount the camera down low here, you've got to be conscious that the lean angle, if you're really pushing the bike around a track, the lean angle can be sufficient that the camera will actually touch the bitumen. So we found it to be safer and more secure to have it above the actual frame slider rather than have it below it. So just an option for getting that forward view from the side of the bike. Now, if we have a look at some of the rearward mounting views that we can utilise, this is definitely one of my favourite. It's up here on the mirror using, I think it's a seat stem mount for a push bike that's made by GoPro. And in this particular case, that particular mount gives you the ability to be able to rotate the camera any particular way and lock it in place. But used in conjunction with this little ball pivoting attachment that you can also get from GoPro, you're able to position this in a pretty useful way to look backwards down the side of the bike or at the rider specifically. So one of my favourite in terms of getting a look at the rider. Going back to that one we show you at the beginning at the top of the steering head, if we're using a RAM mount, it's pretty easy to be able to turn the camera around and rotate it backwards so you get a rearward view directly towards the rider. The only issue with this one is the camera is pretty much parallel with where the hands are, so you can get a bit of a strange view of the rider and the position that they seem to be in, but it's a useful mount in certain situations. We can also use the pillion pegs at the back to mount a camera. Now, in this particular case, we've got it on the right-hand side above the muffler exhaust here, and in this particular case, it's a great angle to get footage of the rider who's following this particular bike. Brings the wheel into play, the wheel moves up and down, you see the suspension working, and sometimes you'll see the muffler. Now, I'm not too worried about noise with these cameras because we're going to take the noise away from this particular camera because it could be quite loud. Works pretty well when you get rid of the number plate, so use one of those, if you're on track, you remove that and get a clear view rearwards. The only caution with this one is just remember that sometimes these foot pegs can get a bit of a wobble, so you might need some tape to pull them tight to take that play out so that this camera stays nice and stable. Another favourite one of mine is this rear mount up on the top where the pillion seat would be. In this case we've got a Macau mounted here. It's a rearward view where we catch a bit of the tail of the motorcycle, and we can also focus on what's happening behind, the track disappearing in the distance or the rider following. Works pretty well, particularly if the rider's nice and close from the rear. Now, a couple of things that you can do with this. First of all, you can turn this camera around and you can look forward as well. And with a nice super view or super wide view, you get the movement of the rider, and you'll see that angle's used quite a bit in MotoGP. Now, if you have this little device, basically what this is an attachment to allow you to mount two cameras. One looking backwards, one looking forwards, so you can utilize the same piece of footage if you're making, you know, some sort of video of one lap of a track, and do little cutouts and you know, kind of seamlessly tie it all together. But pretty useful little device, and goes hand in hand with this particular position here. The last one I wanted to show you was where we mount a gimbal camera in using this ram mount above the A-side of pillion grip near the fuel cap. In this particular case, we've got the DJI Osmo, which is just a super cool, anything up to 4K quality video that can be attached, and you'll see it has a little shock absorber system to take all of the movement out. Now, I simply use the ram mount system, which gives me the flexibility to be able to attach it kind of anywhere. In this particular case, I just simply screw it on, and now I've got a nice sturdy mount for the camera. But in this particular case, we're using the DJI also provide these little shock absorber mount, which is attached to that camera. So what that will do is take all of the bumps out, any undulations on the road surface will just be absorbed through the camera, through the shock absorber, and we just get this real super smooth buttery footage where the bike just rolls underneath the camera. So there you go, there's some options that we utilise to mount GoPro cameras on a sports bike, predominantly for getting track footage. What we haven't shown you is the relationship between these different positions and the width settings on the cameras, and we're going to run through that in a separate video.